thanks everybody for joining in tonight, and those that might listen to it at a later stage. I suppose, as Hannah said, I've been doing this for a long time now, more years than I'd like to count at this point. But what that has done is probably given me a wide range of experiences of individuals and sports. I currently work in making sports. I have worked in water sports, and I've worked in team sports. I've worked around a lot of different areas, and I suppose and I think this is probably very representative of what we've got on tonight. The key thing is looking at the individual and what the requirements are, even more so than the sport, firstly, and then trying to apply that in the sporting context as well. I think tonight, because we've got such a range of disciplines that we want to try and address, is very, very difficult to do that in a webinar where it's very generic. But what I would like to be able to think is that you will absolutely ask questions. I've heard them all before. If I can't answer them for you, I'll find out the answers and we'll go back to Hannah and get them sorted. We've got a range of ages, male, female, different disciplines, and the thing about it is, and this is the one thing possibly I want you to take away from here, and the one thing, if anything, we remember out of that nutrition is one size doesn't fit all, and that probably fits this conversation really well tonight, to be honest. I want us to come away with, it's not always about what you don't eat, it's about what you do eat, which is important. And I think, you know, especially maybe coming out into this time of the year, everybody starts off the year with resolutions of what they're not going to do when it comes to eating and nutrition and so on and so forth. And actually sometimes it's what you do, it's really important as well. So all movements in the right direction are important. And remember, for me, in terms of nutrition, one of the things that I've learned quite significantly is it's the process as opposed to where we get to, or the results. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to bring up the presentation. I probably should have had that on from the beginning, and we'll just start it off now. So again, the questions, ask whatever you like, and we'll hopefully come to them at the end. And, you know, good conversation. I can learn as much from you guys. I always like to think I come away with something that I learn and can apply to my work as well. So for me, my mantra is keep things simple. Go for the easy wins on things, because for some people, and again, I come back to that New Year's resolutions, generally New Year's resolutions are done now. We've made what they are, and we're kind of going, can't be bothered with this, and the wheels come off the bus. And that's because we try and do too much. So keep things simple and try and go for the easy wins is always a good option here. For me, it's really one part of the performance puzzle. It's not everything, but it certainly can underpin a lot of things. Some things you can feel the difference by the end of the week, and other things it takes a little bit longer, and that's why it's a bit more frustrating from that point of view as well. And the key thing for me is, have you got the energy? Have you got the energy to do what you want to do? Have you got the energy to do all the things that you have to do in your general life? One of, you know, when I speak to people about how they eat and when they eat, you know, one of the things, in fact, today with an athlete was he reported that he was really tired. And I said to him, his training regime has increased quite significantly. And he said, but I'm not hungry. And one of the actual responses to really hard training, or, you know, a hard session, for some people is that you actually lose your appetite. So that can have an impact on your recovery and then subsequent sessions where you feel tired. The other thing is that what sometimes happens as well for all of the rest of us is if we haven't eaten well, during the day, then we feel tired later in the afternoon and evening. And then what happens is we make poor choices in terms of what we do eat. So although the evidence around things like breakfast taking can be, you know, either way, what I definitely see in my practice is that those people that consume breakfast probably have better energy levels throughout the day and are less likely to make poor choices later in the day. The other thing about breakfast is that it's less likely that you eat crisps and chocolates and sweets and biscuits and stuff, you know, at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, but it's more likely that you eat those foods at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night when you're watching TV and you're exhausted and you go, what can I have? Or I'm feeling tired and I'd like a lift. So having the energy is really important, not only for what you're doing in terms of your sport, but also in your day-to-day lives as well. In terms of performance nutrition, as we said, we're looking for some short-term gains out of that. And if that's that you're more consistent in what you do, you're feeling better, you're more energetic, you know, you don't feel as sore. I think that's a really easy one as well. If you've had a long day out on the water, you know, or a hard session on the water, you know, and you come in the next day and you're really, really sore, that indicates to me that you haven't fueled properly. So that's a really easy way of telling that that's the case, because what happens there is we break down muscle mass to fuel the work that we're doing, and we're excessively sore then for a longer time then as well. Then what you want to do is you want to pick out maybe some of your longer term aims and objectives as well, and that depends on what you're trying to achieve. And again, it'll be different things for different people as well. But the main aim really is to allow you guys to train and also provide enough nutrients for daily life. And this definitely is where it's not one size fits all. It's requirements are different from a 16-year-old to a 60-year-old. Your training status can be different. You may have been back in the day training a lot, maybe even up to twice a day, and now it's recreational at the weekends, but you still want to get more out of it. And then there could be some underlying medical conditions that we need to take account of. For example, things like celiac disease, IBS, etc., etc. The list goes on. So we need to factor all of those in as well. And for me, these are kind of the things that the impact can really. So when I'm talking with you guys, I'm really looking at, are you well? Are you somebody who's picking up a lot more colds or flus or things like that more frequently? Cold, you know, these are the things that kind of are red flags for me. We also see less risk of injury, soft tissue injuries or some of our bony injuries, and fatigue and tiredness tends to be less as well. Performance is improved. You're getting more consistency in what you're doing as well. Fatigue is tired, we can push that out a bit. And, you know, yes, we're tired, but we're maybe not as tired as we, you know, can be. And then we enhance that recovery so we can come back in and do it again and again. And if somebody is recovering from an injury, then we can get healing going as quickly as possible, and we can get recovered and back into training and competition as quickly as possible as well. In terms of a performance impact, and these are things that I would talk about with the coaches, well, your athletes are not losing days to training and illness and injury. We can get the adaptations from the training program, which is useful. And then if somebody is unwell or has been injured, we can get them back to training as quickly as possible as well. And I suppose this is where I really miss not being in a room with people. But, you know, this seems to be tricky enough in a lot of circumstances. And Hannah, I'm not sure, do we have a chat box or anything of people, you know, does anybody have any ideas as to why maybe this might be tricky or difficult? If you wanted to put them up there, even in the short term.
I don't know if they have the chat box function, but they definitely have the Q&A. So if anyone wants to fire anything in there, there are no silly answers.
Give it a wee second or two to see if we see anything popping up in that.
How fast can you type?
Nope, people not that keen yet.
Give them a bit of time.
There's lots of reasons why it can be tricky, and we'll come on to those in a minute. We might come back to this at a later stage. We can pick up this question at a later stage, but it kind of is a bit of a maze of information out there, and what people think they have to do, and where they're trying to go to is impacted and affected by so many things. And if we look at some of the things that are out there at the moment, we have one nutrient versus the other. So at the moment, everything to do with sugar and carbohydrates is not good. Whereas when I started my work many years ago, fat was the evil nutrient that's out there. The reality is that neither one of these probably is the case. For some people, yes, they do consume too much sugar. For others, they do consume potentially too much fat, but it's not that they consume too much fat, it's the type of fats that's really important as well. We have now got lots of, ideas around variations in what people should be consuming, whether it's going paleo, ketogenic, etc., etc. And this is one of my favorite things, and I hope you can see this here, but it says lead, uranium, and cocaine are also gluten-free. Just because it's gluten-free doesn't mean that it's actually healthy for you. And lots of things now have these health halos applied to them. And one of those, actually, would you believe, even though it's a nutrient and it is important, we now see protein applied across the board on everything. And by some reason, then that then makes it something that's more healthy, in inverted commas, than not having it. And examples would be, a protein Mars bar. It's still a Mars bar. Protein muffin, chocolate muffin, it's still a muffin. So we have to be really mindful that companies and marketing are trying to sell us something, and actually, yes, in some circumstances, for example, celiac disease, gluten-free products, it's not that it's desirable, it's actually essential. But what we have is we have some people with IBS that do actually struggle with some types of carbohydrates, and they find that when they consume gluten-free, that might make things easier, but it's actually not the gluten that's the issue, it's the wheat. But because a lot of breads and pastries and stuff like that are gluten-free are also wheat-free, the focus is on the gluten, but it's actually not the right thing. So people are getting mixed up, and we see this healthy low of gluten-free, that's healthy for us. But actually, would you believe that in terms of gluten-free, it's really important to recognize that actually the second most important source of calcium in our diet is actually from white flour. And if we restrict that from our diet, we actually restrict quite a significant amount of calcium. And what we also have then is people restricting things like dairy products and lactose particularly. So if you've got somebody who cuts out gluten or white flour, and somebody who cuts out lactose or dairy products, we've now got somebody who puts themselves at serious risk of potentially not having the nutrients in place to support good bone health in the long term. And actually, from my point of view, that is a risk for potentially poor bone health down the line. So we have to be really mindful that we don't have a reductionist view on things, and we have to look at things in the round and not one size fits all. We have to be really mindful about that. So what are the problem areas really? For me, in terms of, and we'll talk, this goes from very athletic based to maybe the rest of us mere mortals that, maybe do our small amount of activity but are not training with a significant load. But for those that are training quite hard, not enough calories for the training load. So one of the first questions I will ask an athlete is, do you train the same way every day? And generally they will say no. And the next question I will ask is, do you eat the same way every day? And quite a lot of them will say, yes, I'm a creature of habit and I like to do that. Now, therein lies your problem if you find that you're lacking energy at some point. So for example, if you go out and do a lot of your paddling or training or whatever it is you're doing weekends, and you tend to eat the same way at the weekends, or maybe slightly different, but overall the same volume, then that's where then on a Monday you can find yourself very flat and maybe not got the energy that you think, or in that second session on a Sunday, you're flat too. You don't have the energy because you didn't think about the fact that you might have a session at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and then you might be out again at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And what that means is that in less than 24 hours, you're actually doing the best part of 2 sessions, whereas you might not have had anything on a Thursday or a Tuesday, etc., etc. So we have to look at the week as a whole, but we also have to look at periods of time as well as days of the week as well. So why is this not coming up for me now? Too many calories. So what tends to sometimes happen is where we get the mismatch is those days that we're not eating enough, there's a mismatch there. So what happens is you're tired, and then that kind of catches up with you then. And on the days that you're not doing as much, some people find that they're eating more. And what happens is then you're between a rock and a hard place then, that what you've eaten isn't enough for what you've done on the days that you needed it, and then you've eaten too much on the days that you don't need it as much, and you're kind of not getting any benefit from anything. So that becomes very frustrating. So it's really looking at where the pressure points are in your week for what you're trying to do, and also being a little bit prepared, and that can help with that as well. So sometimes planning out your week, looking where those training sessions are, and then looking to see what you're doing around that to make sure that you go well prepared for those as well. Too much fat and sugar, and again, it's really the types of fats that we're concerned about here from a health point of view. So looking at less of the trans fats, more of your polyunsaturated or omega-3 type fats as well, from a point of view of not only cardiac health, but actually things like reducing inflammation. And would you believe that actually females that struggle with things like PMS might find benefits from increasing their omega-3 fatty acids, which helps reduce that inflammatory response and may dumb down some of the symptoms around PMS as well. So there are lots of benefits really to increasing omega-3 type foods, which come from, say, our fish, but also come from maybe fortified eggs, things like our nuts, seeds, those types of things are a good source of omega-3s as well. Too much salt, you know, we have a lot of salt in our diet anyway. You know, for example, things like bread that doesn't even taste salty has a lot of salt in it, and that's purely to keep it on the shelf for longer. So anywhere where we don't need to eat salt, it's really crucial that we try and get that down a little bit as well. So because the reality is, if we are eating foods that have a shelf life, there's generally quite a lot of salt in there as well. For some, alcohol is a problem in that it will give us calories, and that can impact in terms of weight, or it also can impact recovery. And also quite often, if you're consuming alcohol, you're not doing some of the jobs that you might do around proper recovery, particularly after a session as well. And that can lead to delayed recovery and no benefits really being seen from the work that you've tried to do as well. Weekends are always interesting because quite a lot of people are very structured through their week, and then come Friday, especially if they work Monday to Friday, things really change quite significantly, and that can really have an impact on how people go about their business in terms of how and when and what they're eating as well. Eating out, you know, sometimes it's a requirement if you're away, a competition, or you're away somewhere and you want to get something. So again, it's what you select, what you're picking. Sometimes people overeat when they're eating out because they've paid for it and whether they need it or not, they're going to finish it. And again, nowadays we're much more inclined to give, takeaway boxes and stuff here, which might have been something of benefit from America, really. But we've left that a little bit too late. But again, asking, if we don't need to eat it all, then things like sauces and gravies and things like that on foods, ask for them to the side as opposed to being poured over, because that can have an impact potentially in a negative way as well. Drinks are an interesting one, and again, they can be used really well in activity where potentially you may have lost your appetite, or you're struggling to say, for example, get solid foods in, especially if you're out on the water. It's a perfect way of actually getting meal replacements, but they can also be ways that we overconsume on things if we don't need it. So it's identifying, do you need it? Why do you need it, and what the aims and objectives overall are. So for example, my athlete today who's struggling with appetite, I'm telling him that he needs to focus on, significant calorific drinks, because that's the way he's going to he couldn't eat his lunch or his dinner today after their session because he felt sick, but he can drink. So that's a good way of replacing what you need there as well. And I've got a cough now. And everybody, requirements are different. And that's why it's really difficult. And I hope that through our Q&A later on, we start to get a feel for, what some of the difficulties and tricky situations that people are coming into. But energy requirements are going to be different. They're going to be determined by your age. They're going to be determined by the training load. They're going to be determined by things like environmental factors. All of these are going to have how many times you train, how many sessions you're doing, what are your aims and objectives from a physical point of view, etc., etc. So all these things all play a role. And remember, the results of what you put in place might not happen tomorrow or the next day. It is a process, and you have to really focus on that road to the process as opposed to what the results are, tomorrow or the next day, because you're not going to see them. You might see small changes in terms of how you feel, but the long-term picture, you have to keep that in mind as well. And this is important for me because this is what we see really in terms of things like energy balance, is the relationship between the food that's taken in and what you've also what you're also doing. So that's key to remember as well. So the energy out then is the calories that are used for what we've done in terms of activity, and then all of the other things that we need. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that will help us understand what actually recovery means as well. And this is the piece that's sometimes really difficult to balance as well. And what are some of the negative effects? And these are some of the things that potentially we might see in terms of delayed recovery as well. For females and also for males, we see things like a loss of menstrual cycle potentially. It can have an impact on bone health. We see if we're not eating enough for what we're trying to do, our system actually slows down to try and match what is going in versus what's going out. If you're an athlete that's getting injured frequently, you're just not that unlucky. So you've got to ask yourself, okay, what is going on here? Because most of my referrals come from either the physios or the doctors, and it's due to this. This is what goes on there as well. We see changes in some of our bloods, things like our iron gets affected, some things like our white cells get affected. And what we see is an increase in athletes that have upper respiratory tract infections. And again, when you're out on the water, you are more at risk anyway. So we have to be mindful about that it is something that you can pick up, either respiratory tract infections or gastro infections. And then things like anemia or low iron is also a risk factor there. And if you have low iron, you have a bigger risk of higher immunity issues as well. Remember, if you're under the age of 18, you have a higher chance of having low iron anyway. And if you're 18 or less and are a female, you have a much higher chance again as well. So females will have a bigger risk of having lower levels of iron up until the menopause, and then that kind of steadies out a little bit than males. But actually, in real terms, we're seeing lots of males with lower iron levels as well. Would you believe we see changes in cardiovascular function, and particularly raises in cholesterol? I had a 14 or a 15-year-old the other day with an elevated cholesterol. Now, people, and I quite often see this actually, would you believe, in masters athletes who train quite well, and in their opinion, and I put this in inverted commas, they eat really well. Okay. Now, what happens in my mind there, and this is the reality, they're not putting in enough energy for the work that they're doing. So what happens is cholesterol is a fat that's stored in the liver. We need it for lots of different physiological functions. It's really important. Too much of it's not good, and too little if it's not good either. But what happens is it's generally stored in the liver, but in the absence of not enough fuel that we're eating going in, the liver releases cholesterol into the system to try and give the system a boost. And then what happens is we see it circulating in the blood. When we see that, it's a red flag for me that we're not eating enough potentially. And what we do is we have a look at the timing and how much people are doing, etc., etc. And if that's the case, we can get that reduced in a very short space of time. If it's a lifestyle issue, like maybe I would have or somebody else would have that's not doing anything, the chances of me getting that sorted from a dietary response in 6 weeks is very, very slight. It probably take a lot longer, but we see that being resolved in athletes relatively quickly as well. And then what we see is we also see other things where people are not getting to sleep well. If you're not eating enough and you haven't recovered well enough, it will impact your sleep. That will have a secondary impact on your recovery as well, and also can have an impact on your physical status also. And then we see other things like fatigue, poor mood, etc., etc. You know, I'm sure people have heard the term hangry. When some of our boxers are trying to make weight, they're like bags of cats, some of them. So you see that in its very real sense whenever you've got athletes in that scenario as well. So, you know, that it does not help in any way. And this is kind of my really bad drawing here. But if we think about our fuel tank, which is what we eat and drink, and then we've got our training pot, then we've got, say, general health, we've got bone health, we've got immunity, and we've lots of other pots here. I just didn't have space for them, but we've got hormones, we've got soft tissue, we've got lots of different things, right? So again, this is where I'd love to have you. I would be asking you, do you think that the fuel pot fills any of these more preferentially than the others? So do you think it's that's number one, or that's number one, or that's number one, or that's number one, or any of these others? Or do you think it gives a little bit to all of those? It's kind of 50-50 on the results on when I ask these questions. But what happens is training is number one because it's an evolutionary thing. If there's a lion or a tiger standing right behind you and it's going to eat you, you need to move, and you need to move really fast, because if you're a goner, none of these matter, okay? But what you're hoping is that there's enough fuel for this and then enough to go into all these other pots. Now, if training goes up, and that's what we talked about earlier, where you potentially just with the way that your sessions fall, or you say to yourself, oh my goodness, I have a spare hour here, I'm just going to go out and do something here, whether it's a run or actually getting into the water and doing a session or whatever, but you've already done one lesson a day beforehand, that's where your training load goes up, but you haven't prepared for that. So what happens is, if that happens once in a blue moon, that's not a problem. But it's where that starts to happen every week. And the easiest scenario that I can see for that is that, and again, as we come to the longer evenings and people have an opportunity to maybe do more in the evening time, you know, you could go out on a Friday evening after work or after college or after school or whatever, and you have a session, and then you're doing a planned session on a Saturday morning. Well, suddenly now you've got 2 sessions within 12 hours. So if that happens then week in, week out, we have a bigger risk then of not only that the fuel going into these tanks are not getting enough, but actually some of the reserves and some of these pots actually have to go in to cover the cost of training. Now, people say to me, but sure, I would know that because I would lose weight. And that doesn't work like that. If it did, that would be great because we'd all pick up on that. But actually, one of the impacts is on some of our hormones. And there's a hormone called cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which when we go into a state of shock or stress, which effectively this is what this is, we release much more of that. And what that does is it actually battens down the hatches on any potential weight loss for some people. And actually, if anything, their weight can actually go up, would you believe? So it does not, it's absolutely counterintuitive for some people, but that's, the body is not a simple in versus out. It's a real big soup of things. So that's why it's really important to think about all of the things that we do, because it can all link together and have a real impact on the outcome. But sometimes you can't see the outcome, and this is a real difficult thing with nutrition. We're sometimes looking at what those outcomes are going to be or not going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years time, and that's the tricky bit. So that's why sometimes it's not about what you're not eating, it's actually about making sure that we're putting in enough to suit what you're trying to do. And this recovery is focused around 4 key pillars, really. The refueling piece, which is really where the carbohydrate comes in, that's part of it. The repair piece is really where your protein comes in. And what you find is a lot of people really focus on, oh, I'm going to have a protein shake, but actually they've not put in the fuel that they need to put in for the work that they've done. We need to look at rehydration, and we also need to look at our sleep and relaxation and rest and stuff like that, because the reality is probably it's number 1, would you believe? And then we've got to look at all of these other things as well. Now, you've got to remember that different environments might impact this in a different way. So if you go out on really rough weather, rough water, it's really windy, or it's really warm, that will change the requirements for some of these as well. So we may have to really refocus on things like carbohydrate if it's really, really warm. So because we burn through carbohydrate much quicker in the heat than we would do in weather like this. So if your strategy is to go out with just, you know, a bottle of water for your rehydration in really cold weather, you need gloves, you need a hat, blah, 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 and you do the same thing on a really hot day, that's where it's going to go belly up. So we need to look at adapting your strategy to suit not only what you're doing, but also the environment as well, which is going to have a big impact on yourselves also. So we talked at the beginning about simple. So how do we put some of these strategies into practice, right? And I'm going to talk about protein because it's everywhere. And everybody thinks that, okay, for me to really do things well, I'm going to have whey protein, okay? And it's really popular strategy with athletes and players across every sport. In fact, Joe Public in general, right? So there is good evidence to link recovery with adequate protein, but it's about making sure we split it through the day as opposed to taking it all in one go. But you have to remember, if you just focus on protein and you haven't focused on the fuel as well, it's not going to deal with the problem as well. So the reason that it helps in terms of that repair piece is that amino acids, which are the building blocks of the protein itself, they're involved in muscle protein synthesis. And there's a couple of key ones. There's one that you might hear of, it's one called leucine, and it would be a real a real trigger for protein synthesis as well. And the evidence is that as we get older, it may help to preserve muscle, because a really good analogy for muscles as we get older, it's almost like a dimmer switch. So as we get older, that dimmer switch starts to turn down a little bit, and the ability for us to absorb protein actually becomes not as good. So that's why we may need ever so slightly more of it. But again, by splitting it up into portions throughout the day, we can do that. And that's very easy to do. You know, you could have eggs for your breakfast, you could have yogurt and fruit, you have milk on your cereal, you could have toast with, you know, peanut butter and banana rather than just butter and jam, or cream cheese, etc. So that could be breakfast. You could have, you know, oats or cereal and milk. At break time, you could have some nuts, your meat or chicken or fish in your sandwich, baked potato with maybe some baked beans, you know, so that we're getting small amounts of protein in lots of different things. And I think the key thing is that we distribute that throughout the day rather than depend on one key thing. Now, when we think about just whey protein, that's all we're getting, right? And the thing about it is, that's not a great place to be, because we're assuming then that we're ticking the box if we do that. And actually, we're not doing that. We're not ticking the box, because if you go out and paddle, yes, you do need to repair the muscles that have been damaged, but you do need to put the fuel back in as well. And you may need to do other things. So are there other foods that can do a similar job? Can it help with the recovery? Could there be any benefits? Could there be a cost benefit? And from my point of view, from an anti-doping point of view, I've got to look at the safety piece there as well. And again, this is really simple, but it's not very sexy. And people think, well, oh, well, and I don't own cows either, by the way, just in case you think I'm a dairy farmer, I'm not. But it is a really simple strategy. And the reality is as well, I'm actually really bad, would you believe, at drinking milk, but I will take it another way. So I will use yogurt as an option, and I'll use cheese, and I'll use milk and whatever. But I drink black coffee, and it wouldn't be my go-to. Others, they can manage it, but there are other ways. So we can look at a variety of different options. But why is it useful? So now what it can do is it can give us the protein. Not only will it give us whey protein, but it will also give us another. So whey protein is absorbed quickly. And then we've got casein, which is a slower absorbed protein, and it's there as well, okay? Because it's got lactose in it, which is a natural sugar that's based there. So that sugar will not have an impact negatively on your teeth unless it is like a sweetened milk, like a chocolate milk or a strawberry milk or something like that. But pure milk, ordinary, just the way it is, that type of carbohydrate is not going to have an impact from a dental health point of view. And in fact, if anything, it will be a benefit to protecting teeth. And the reason that that's the case is because it also contains these products here: calcium, phosphorus, potassium. And calcium there will help protect teeth as well, which is important. We've also got things like B12, B2, iodine. But also what it contains is, because the base of milk is actually water, and because we've actually got electrolytes in there, things like potassium, it can actually help with rehydration as well. Now, you're saying to me, there's absolutely no way that I'm taking a milk drink out when I'm paddling. I get that. I understand that. But we could look at putting that into maybe adding it with Greek yogurt, maybe a banana, and maybe some oats, mixing it up as a kind of a meal replacement. And that could be something that you could have coming in. Or, for example, if you've had your 2 sessions, one on a Friday night and now one on a Saturday morning, and you're that person that doesn't like to eat an awful lot before you go out, we can now start to think about ways that we can add other things in that's going to kill multiple birds with one stone. And that's what you're looking at. Why look to one thing, to do one thing, when you can actually deal with multiple issues? And this is really important, particularly for our younger viewers here, because between the ages of about 14 and 20, you are laying down the bones for the rest of your life, right? We need to get them as dense as possible. You are paying into your bone pension, and that bone pension needs to be, it stops really around about the ages of 20 or 21. And we need to have as much density in those bones. So we really do need things like the calcium. Some milks now have vitamin D in it as well, which is really important. But actually, would you believe there's good evidence to suggest that carbohydrates really important for bone health, as is protein as well. So the problem that we have is you're not going to be worried about your bones until you're 50 or 60 or 70. But and because it's a silent thing, you don't know anything about it, we've really got to think about all of these other things that we're trying to get right when you're younger and maybe not that interested. On the flip side, those of you that are in later life, and when I'm talking about that physiologically, I am talking about that from the ages of 30, 40, and then, 50, 60 beyond. We really do need to think about these things too, because they can maintain muscle mass and they can maintain our bone health as well, which is really very important. So for me, food is a useful focus rather than supplements. And here, hands up here, I do recommend them, but they need to be fit for purpose, right? What really frustrates me is people buying products that, number one, leads them down a garden path that they shouldn't be on, that's not even dealing with anything that they've just done. And number two, they're wasting money whenever they could be doing something actually much better, but it just doesn't sound as good. It doesn't sound as, in date or in vogue or whatever. For me, food is useful because we build from the base, and then we can add in stuff. It cuts out a sticky plaster approach, really. And don't get me wrong, I have a 15 or 16-year-old here who gives me tutorials regularly on whey protein. So I understand fully that it's out there, it's everywhere. And sometimes the simple solutions are the best, but they sound too simple, really. When we have an over-focus on one nutrient, we leave weaknesses in other places, and that's really important as well. And again, if you focus on whey protein, you're losing the opportunity to get calcium and, say, for example, things like probiotics and so on and so forth from other foods that can give you a multitude of different things there as well. These protein yogurts, they're, good option there. Actually, these things here are one step back from cottage cheese. So that's what Greek yogurt is. So again, you'll see that a lot of them, there are a variety of them here. The ones that have a higher carbohydrate intake are the ones generally that have kind of either a jam or some kind of flavoring added to them. This 0% total here, you can see it as a much lower carbohydrate base here, because really the carbohydrate is just coming from the lactose here. So it's also higher in protein because it's strained even further, so it's got a significant more. But all of them, and again, you might use different ones in different places depending on what you're trying to achieve as well. From a fluid point of view, why is it important? Well, obviously, again, things like heat is going to increase your requirements. If you're dehydrated, you're going to use carbohydrate much quicker as well, and that's why things like cramp and fatigue and tiredness sets in. And it's not so much actually the hydration or the fluid bit, it's actually how the whole lot works together. And it's probably due to fatigue of muscles, due to lack of fuel, that's causing the cramp rather than specifically the hydration, but it's all linked in together. So that's really important. And what you have to do is you have to think about how it can help in terms of things like focus, things like fatigue. You need to practice now, even though it's cold and wet and miserable and you don't feel like doing it. Warm drinks, I've got a blackcurrant here that can be warm as well, especially if you're outside, put that in a thermos and have that as opposed to a cold drink. Soup is great. Things like jelly is useful, particularly, if you don't want to be drinking it. And actually, would you believe things like jelly can be useful in terms of injury prevention and injury recovery from as well. So the variety of drinks can be in there, doesn't have to just be water. How you plan your days is really important. What is your training day looking like, or your competition, or whatever you're doing? Does your training plan mirror your competition day? So try and do that as much as possible, because that can help. What difficulties arise when you're working away from home? Maybe you're working, training at college or whatever. Do you ever get nervous? Because again, that can be impacting what you're eating. And again, that athlete that I saw today, he said, the training has really increased and I've lost my appetite. And he has to remember that appetite's not going to be his driver for eating. It actually, he has to eat and not, you know, think about appetite. As we get older, you know, we begin to lose muscle, which is unfortunate, really. But again, you know, our protein and resistance training can help to maintain and sustain that. So that's important. And again, things like our calcium, vitamin D and protein are also very important for bone health. Vitamin D, our main sources of vitamin D are actually sunlight, particularly in the months of June, July and August in this part of the world. So what you're looking at is probably about 10 to 15 minutes on the lower arms before you put on your sunscreen. And that should be enough to build up a storage of vitamin D that should last us into the winter. The reality is at this time of the year, our vitamin D stores become quite depleted. So the reality is we probably do need something like a vitamin D supplement through the winter time up to probably maybe May time as well. Big long gaps, try and avoid that. And again, if you're going out to do a training session or something in the evening, try and move your main meal of the day earlier in the day, because that will help your energy levels, particularly if you're out late in the evening. And the thing about it is that does take the pressure off you having to eat then late at night when you're really not getting the benefit from it as well. Whereas you can have a supper then afterwards, which is then recovering you from what you've just done, but also thinking about the day ahead as well. So competition, again, practicing with you know, what you do in longer training days or at weekends. Sometimes people get a wee bit nervous, so things like lower fiber options might be better, particularly on race days, because it reduces the burden on your gut and it reduces the risk of things like bloating or pain, or, you know, just things like that that can exist when you're a bit nervous as well. If people have issues, do think about something like maybe seeing somebody for FODMAP advice, which can help. And it maybe is really only focused around competitions. And again, the focus should be on carbohydrates, as they are the fuel of choice. So, and what you have to remember is your environment is going to play a big role. So again, more wind, out at sea, rough water, the heat, all of these things are going to play a massive role in how much carbohydrate you need and how quickly you fatigue as well. So you may need to prepare for that in terms of having things with you if you're out in the boat as well. So that does, you cannot be out long periods of time, you know, and I'm talking anything over, say, an hour and a half. You should really think about how you feel that period of time as well. So just before we move on to our questions, do we think there is a magic bullet? And this is one that I definitely would be saying, I don't think there is, right? If I knew what it was, I'd love that question, but I don't think there is a magic bullet. I don't think there are one size that fits all. And I think we need to look at getting our basics right, our timing, looking at key points in our week. Are you focusing on the right areas? And that one size doesn't fit all. So it's really important there. Watch marketing, because if something is being sold to you, you need to be really mindful about this, because they're not there. They are not in the business of selling you something for your good. They are there in the business of selling you something for their good. So always remember that. And listen, if a product tells you that it can do everything, that's red flag, right? So something really should be dealing with one particular issue, but once it can solve all the problems of the world, you know that that's definitely a red flag. And if something sounds too good to be true, it generally is as well. And we've really got to watch social media as our sources of information, because you know, they can be quite tricky, and some of the messages out there are just not the best in the world as well. So I suppose just before we go to our questions, sometimes it's what you can't see that's important, right? So, you know, I've got an athlete at the moment that from the outside, she looks unbelievable. But I can tell you that on the inside, you know, some of the markers that I'm seeing, it's not great. And I would be very worried about things like injury and stuff like that down the line. And I'm trying to get things right there. But there's a multitude of factors in there that's causing some difficulties. So don't read the book by the cover. And this carrot here, you know, looks fantastic from an Instagram point of view. But really there's not a lot going on here. This lad here doesn't look great in terms of Instagram or whatever it is, but, you know, has a very solid base and is definitely going to be a much healthier individual in the long term. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to stop sharing now and see what we've got in terms of.
Yeah, I'll thank you so much, Sharon. That was brilliant. Some have come through, and then I'm sure more are going to come through as
Okay.
we go on. That was fascinating. I feel like I've been re-educated. I should have known all of it, but no, it's brilliant. Thank you so much on that. I'll start with the questions, and I'm sure more will come, and
Okay.
I have a few as well. So let's go. We had here with 2 questions. I sometimes run out of energy in a long paddle and take some sugar to get energy quickly. I don't like to have a lot of food in my stomach when I'm paddling, so I usually have a big dinner the night before, porridge for breakfast, and a small roll and a banana for lunch. Are there any recommendations on this, please?
Okay, so not unusual, very common there. So again, going for foods that are higher in carbohydrate, which you are with things like white roll and banana and stuff like that. What you might find actually is that, you know, people think, oh, cornflakes and Rice Krispies, they're really not, it's like eating fresh air. And actually it is like eating fresh air, but they're relatively high in carbohydrates. So sometimes cereals like that can be very useful, especially when you don't feel like having a full stomach or anything on board. I would go with those lighter type options, which are also less fiber. So it means that you can eat more of them. So the good thing about porridge is, for us mere mortals, is it fills us up, but actually a small amount of it will fill us up. But what we want to be able to do is eat a larger amount and not fill us up and not feel that full. So they're quite often useful, particularly at night, but also in the morning before, you know, sessions or paddles, whenever there's a lot of pressure there. I would also look at maybe some drinks. So what I suggested there, where you might use Greek yogurt, you might use either ordinary milk or oat milk or whatever kind of milk you like, mix in a banana, maybe a scoop of oats, and blend up the whole thing together. And what you find is that liquids can often be a good solution whenever you're not feeling like that. The other thing to remember is that you can train your guts. That's the key, right? And this becomes really important in competitions. So even though we may not like it, which a lot of us don't, if we kind of work it up and don't start with massive amounts, but really look to kind of build on that a little bit, you can actually train your system to get used to it. And then what happens is you get the value for it, not only in your longer paddles, but also in competition when you're really very nervous. And the first thing that goes is digestion. It slows down, you don't feel like eating, you feel nauseous, all of those things. But if you've trained yourself to feel comfortable in a situation that you feel comfortable in, it's much easier carrying that through into a competition. The other thing that you were saying there about taking, so that's where also some of the kind of gels and sugars and sports drinks and stuff can be useful. just be mindful about your teeth. So if you're having some of those, bring some water with you as well. Some people find that a little bit of sugar-free gum can help increase the saliva production in your mouth and therefore reduce the acidity and help with protecting your teeth as well. So, you know, we've got a real juxtaposition here where we're trying to recommend one thing, but we know from a dental health point of view, we've got to be really careful with that too. Would you believe I have dentists in at the moment doing some assessments in our athletes because, you know, I'm very worried about that. So we want that education going through there as well.
Oh, fascinating. I never considered the dental part of that. From the same person, also after a hard paddle, I have a hard time recovering. My body feels out of sync for a few days afterwards. Is there any advice on how to recover faster?
I think we have to think about how much calories overall you're needing for that period of time, how long the gap has been between you eating, let's say, lunch and maybe going for a paddle, and what other things that you've been doing. So front loading some of the days with maybe larger breakfasts, larger lunches, if you're going out, let's say after school or work, really putting a big effort into the night before the breakfast that day, being really conscious of having a dinner-sized portion of lunch so that you're pushing not only protein and carbohydrate, but actually calories. That's really important because people don't think about them, but actually that's one of the reasons that people are not recovering well enough. Because if you're out for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and you're only having a gel, you're not covering the cost of that time well enough. So we need to look at how long you're out for and what you're having in when you're out as well. So it may be that you have to increase the volume of what you're eating during the session as well as earlier in the day. If that can't be done, then you've got to up the ante on the timing and how quick you get it in after you come back. And then it probably needs to be a number. There needs to be recovery immediately within an hour, and then probably 2 hours again, we go again.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that, is kind of just we deal with the aftermath and we forget the before, during,
you
and
have to get the boat out, you get cleaned up, you blah, blah, blah. Suddenly there's an hour and a half gone and nothing has happened. So, you know, front load things, number one. And then when you're doing all of the kind of admin stuff that goes on around water sports, of which there are a lot, you need to have something with you so that you don't miss that timing. That's important because we're looking to reduce the gaps of when you ate last, and also think about the cost of what you've just done. We've got to put money in the bank of you as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and you made a really good point in the presentation I saw you give recently about the days we're not training are important to fuel for the days we are training.
So you see them as bookends. So let's say you've a rest day on a Friday, but you've 2 big days on a Saturday and Sunday. Like if you're out for long periods of time on the water, prepping to be on the water, driving to get to be on the water, all of these things, you kind of reduce the length of time that you have to put in the volume of food that you need to think about. So you need to bookend your Friday becomes actually your active recovery day, as opposed to, oh, I'm not training, therefore I don't eat as much.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to the next question. So great presentation, Sharon. Thanks a million. As a recently diagnosed celiac, I'm wondering if there has been an increase in food intolerances in recent years, such as lactose, wheat, etc. And if so, have you any thoughts on what's driving this?
So the interesting things that we see in terms of, so there's food allergy, which is very different from food intolerances. So intolerances generally won't kill you, which is the key thing, and probably the big key difference between an allergy and an intolerance. What I do see is that IBS is definitely, I see it a lot in athletes. It's very prevalent in Joe Public, and it's very prevalent in athletes. So what happens is IBS, the guts are triggered by certain foods, And some of those come from a range of different carbohydrates, which are known as FODMAPs. One of them is lactose, one of them is wheat, some of them are from things like garlic and onions, absolutely lethal for some people. Things like the sugar alcohols or the polyols that are added to foods now so that they can say that they're sugar-free. So actually they play havoc with your guts. So people are taking, you know, sugar-free bars or protein bars or whatever, and they're going, oh, you know, I think I have an intolerance to gluten. It's not generally the gluten, it's actually the sorbitol and xylitol that's causing them to have a lot of the problems that they're having. And I just think generally there's a lot more stresses out there, and our guts actually are the #1 organ that responds to stress. And even those individuals that don't have IBS, you know, your guts are very, very responsive to lots of different things. So there may be something going on there. I certainly see from, you know, celiac disease is interesting. You know, there's some schools of thought that are saying that it's you know, an autoimmune disease. We see it prevalent in I suppose Ireland, because we have a very high incidence of celiac disease. Sometimes it can be undiagnosed for a long period of time. Other times it's diagnosed from early doors. But celiac disease is something that's been in Ireland, island of Ireland. There's a couple of ones that are very prevalent in Ireland, and it's due to our small genetic pool, really. But I see also celiac disease. I work clinically in the Belfast Trust, and actually I work in respiratory medicine, and I see a lot of people with respiratory disease with actually celiac disease being diagnosed later in life. So there's clearly some links in terms of some of those autoimmune diseases potentially as well. I'm just not sure what they are. There's definitely a research project in there somewhere, and I have been saying that for a long time. But yeah, I'm quite surprised certainly at the amount of celiac disease I see in older individuals, but I also see a lot of IBS as well.
Just maybe on the IBS, if there's some young athletes or people that, what would be kind of the red flags for people? What would be the symptoms they need to look out there for?
So for some people, we've got a number of different types of IBS. We have diarrhea predominant IBS, which is people have looser motions and maybe more frequent. We have some people that are constipated predominant. So they tend to have less, you know, it's harder for them to have emotion. They tend to get, both groups tend to have a lot of bloating, wind, cramps, you know, particularly in and around competitions as well, maybe when they're stressed, all of these types of things. And then you've got people that are really lucky and they go between the two, which, you know, and again, a lot of athletes that are competing at a high level, again, stress plays a big role in that, and their guts do react to that. And again, I think we have that messaging around what's healthy. And we have to remember that that word healthy should be put in context. So for somebody that has IBS or has very responsive or guts to certain things, you actually don't want to be putting in a huge amount of fiber, because your gut has to then deal with that. And if you're nervous, that slows down digestion. So it kind of makes things much worse then as well. So we have to remember, the one thing that I would say is that for me, there's no such thing as a good or a bad food. It's how we put things together that's really important in the big scheme of things. So for somebody who's sitting on the couch 23 out of the 24 hours a day and not doing anything and whatever, some of their behaviors are not healthy. But if somebody's out training 5 or 6 or 7 times a week and maybe doing another sport and whatever, and not eating enough or eating too healthily, and I do that in inverted commas, that's not healthy either, because that's where we see lots of the injuries and sicknesses and stuff like that that we've got to really look at. Remember, the body is an engine and it does need fuel, and the harder that engine works, the more fuel that you need.
Brilliant. Well, this leads on well to the next question. Would you recommend carb loading for competitions? And if so, how many days before the competition should you start carb loading?
So carb loading is something that kind of was very popular in the 70s and 80s and still is talked about to this day. Quite often, if you're following a good intake of carbohydrates through your training, it's really important that we get their training right. So if you're doing that, that means that your training's going really well. Okay, so and you can also practice what that feels like, how your guts react to that, etc., etc. What you don't want to do is fire in a whole load of extra carbohydrates for 1 or 2 days before a competition and be going, oh God, I don't feel too well. That's really not for me. But what happens is, leading into competition, if you're eating the same way as you've been during training and then you taper your training, you automatically create a carbohydrate load because you're not you might be just doing, you know, some really very light paddles, or, you know, you're not doing as much. But if you continue with your routine of how you eat, where you have carbohydrate there, the very fact that you reduce your training load automatically increases your carbohydrates. So you've just naturally done a carbohydrate load, but you haven't gone hell for leather and increasing the amount that you're eating, which then can have an impact on your guts as well, which you don't want.
Yeah, and that tends to be in the lead up to competition.
Yeah,
training load decreases. So as you're saying, you're
so
then
your taper will naturally create that.
Brilliant. I've been having the same high protein caloric smoothie for breakfast for over 2 years. When I don't have it now, my energy and mood changes. Is there a problem with having the same thing like this every day?
Absolutely not. Nope, definitely not.
If it works, then
yeah, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Another question, do you think supplementation of creatine and beta-alanine can improve the performance of an endurance athlete?
Yeah, I see certainly uses for it in certain circumstances, but again, we want to get the basics right first. That's really important. Where you can, I can see we've certainly used beta-alanine. What it does is it buffers lactic acid. So as the load goes up, or maybe as you come into a period of time where you've got some competition, you can put in a block of, say, 6 weeks of beta-alanine, which helps, you know, buffer lactic acid and helps you recover quicker. The other thing with creatine is if you've got your period of maybe, say, a weights-based training phase, that can help with that. But in the longer term, it potentially can help with recovery as well of longer sessions. So absolutely, it can work in both ways. What I would suggest is you use smaller amounts of the creatine on a more regular basis, and then you can build from there. I would be conscious that it's really important to know why you're using it, have your aims and objectives, but also, are you doing the other things right? Because if you're not fueling and you're putting in creatine and beta-alanine, it's not really going to deal with the problem. So that's why I said that supplements are fine, but make sure that we've got all of the pillars right. And then it's like I call it the sprinkles on the cake. And sometimes when I've got athletes in for education purposes, I get out my sprinklers, you know, my like hundreds and thousands, whatever colors they are, and I just empty them onto a tray. And I said, what's the problem here? And they go, well, there's no cake there to put your sprinkles on. And I go, yeah, because you just want the supplements. You don't want to get, you need to get your base and your cake there. And when you have that all right, then the sprinkles on the cake can make a big difference.
Yeah, great. When sea kayaking, I can feel seasick if I eat food or drink juices. This means I can be on the water for 5 to 6 hours without food. Is there a way of eating at both ends of the trip to cover this? That's quite a difficult one.
That's a tricky one. And that's really tricky for you. Have you ever tried any kind of things to help with the seasickness? Like motion, you know, the way you can get motion tablets or whatever to help with seasickness.
Yeah, I'll see if they come back on the question.
Like that would be something that I would think about as a starting point. And then I would look at, sometimes if the juices are very concentrated, that's tricky, and we make them lighter in terms of them and then try and work up with that. But it's trying to deal with the seasickness. That's a really tricky question. Yeah, you would have to look at the day before. What you do that morning is going to have to be significantly higher, and as soon as you finish, you're going to have to go with it. But like, yeah, you have to work around that. You know, we have people that just get sick and they're nauseous, and we really have to work around that. But also think about some of those sea legs that you can get in terms of motion sickness, in terms of helping with that too. That might be something to consider too.
Brilliant.
I even feel sick thinking about seasickness there.
That makes me think of being pregnant and
oh yeah, yeah. Oh,
and this is it. Oh, you couldn't keep off. It was
yeah. There's bands, isn't there, as well?
Yeah, acupressure.
Yeah,
the acupressure bands,
yeah.
And different things. I was diagnosed. I hope I'm going to pronounce this right. I was diagnosed with hypoglycemic partial paralysis. I find my energy levels can drop despite my diet. I also have IBS. I don't know if this formed the same question. And afterwards, what your thoughts on bulking and then going into an extreme calorie drop? Is that the one in the same question? Yeah.
I don't know. The questions are there. Bulking and an extreme calorie drop is why. That I would have to ask that. I just don't, when you go into an extreme calorie bulk or drop, the first thing that you lose is actually muscle. Like people think, oh, I'm going to drop fat, but you're not. You're actually going to drop muscle mass. And that's really important, because you have to think about what you're doing during that phase in time, and that is going to have an impact overall in your physicality. It's going to have an impact in your fatigue levels, and if you're trying to build lean mass and you're cutting calories, well, you're going and you're training, you have to fuel your training in some way, shape or form, and that will come from muscle mass loss.
Okay, then there's another one here. Any tips for a frugivore struggling to get enough protein?
For what? Sorry.
Frugivore, frugivore, someone who eats fruit, is that not? It's in the answered ones.
Do they eat nuts and seeds? They would be good options for protein for individuals that are focusing on that. Here
90% fruit, 10% veg, nuts, seeds.
Yeah, so your nuts and seeds are going to be very, very good sources of protein. I would be looking at those, making sure that there's things like flax. A variety of them is key, because you know, the more variety you have, then the more of the different types of amino acids that you're going to get, and that's the key thing. Because if you stick to the same nuts and seeds, do they eat legumes at all?
10% veg, it says. 90% fruit, 10% veg. Oh, so 10% veg, nuts, seeds. Yeah.
Okay. So things like legumes is going to be really crucial for them too. Beans, peas, lentils, those types of things can really help with your protein intake as well. And again, variety is key. It's keeping as many types and variety and color and stuff like that. That's going to be the crucial one there.
Brilliant. So we come to the end of our questions. If I've missed a question, can someone just type it in again quickly? If you've got anything else that's come since we've started the Q&A, please fire in now. You did mention at the start, Sharon, if anyone had a really specific question, they could pass it through me and I'd pass it on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just checking. Yeah, I think we've gone through all the questions. Yeah, no. So Sharon, I don't know if you've got any final words or anything you want to add.
I suppose for me, it is very tricky to try and answer all questions for all people when I hope everybody's come away with one thing that they can maybe either see, oh well, maybe I might try that, or maybe that's why I'm fatigued or whatever. I would always start with just doing out my week, get a pen and paper Monday to Sunday, and remember that Sunday leads into Monday, so it's not the end of the week, it goes in a circular format. See when your sessions are, number one, and then see how many gaps you have leading into some of those sessions, because you would be surprised, for example, somebody might eat their dinner at 7 o'clock one evening, and then they decide not to have breakfast, and they don't eat again until 11 o'clock in the morning. That's a significant gap, and if you're going into doing a training session then maybe at lunchtime or early afternoon, that's going to have an impact. Because remember, when you're sleeping, you're still using calories, you're still using nutrients to keep the body going. So you don't want to have the tank empty before you go in to do that session, because that's the kind of things that can impact on your recovery as well.
And getting the benefit from the session itself as well.
100%, 100%. And don't see every session on its own. You've got to see everything as a process. That's the bit that I was talking about, where athletes go, oh, well, I'm not training today, therefore I don't eat as much. That's you just looking at individual days. The individual days add together, and you then get the results from that, not from the individual days.
So planning, preparation, that will help you make better choices, which will serve you long term. Avoiding
getting tired, because we lose our resilience to making good choices then. All of these things can, all of the bits and pieces of the puzzle they're not the big things, they're the little things that all go together.